Hi everyone, welcome. As you can see, I've got some food laid out here, as well as a bin already up here on my bench. It's the bin of mine that's got the African night crawlers in it. This is my oldest system right now, 282 days of age. It ran for 200 days as a composting bin, fed 20 times during that period. And then there was a 42-day period of what I refer to as foraging. And during that foraging period, I just don't feed, and then they're left to really work on picking off the remaining bits and pieces of leftover scraps of bedding and food left in the system. And then the orange that you see here is a plastic bag covering the migration feeding area. And that's what's been going on here for the past 40 days is what I refer to as a horizontal migration, trying to migrate the worms out of the compost that they're inhabiting into a nice collection area. So what we're going to do is check in here. It's been 10 days since we last checked in. Things were looking pretty good. It wasn't fully depopulated yet. In fact, we've been talking about transitioning this to sort of a wedge layout where maybe it's even given more and more time just to work as a system in which the worms have plenty of time to make their way over into their new space, but that also leaves plenty of time for even their cocoons that they might have left behind to hatch and the babies to catch up to them. So I don't know, I've been thinking about transitioning to more of a little bit of a wedge for a while, rather than just a haul out and then a nursery. So I don't know. I think we're going to continue on with feeding the feeding zone, treating it as a wedge for a while longer, and I think after 10 days we might see that they're in need for some food. So let's get to work. I gotta tell you, last time we came in here, the collection area, feeding zone, horizontal migration, feeding zone, whatever you want to refer to it as, it was getting pretty mobbed. There were lots and lots of worms that had come over for the feast that we laid out for them 8 days prior. And then when we reset the feeding 10 days ago, I kind of thought that we'd come back in a similar period of time. That first period, that 22 days that I let this system go when I first set up the horizontal migration, over 3 weeks, it felt to me like when we came in here, the collection area seemed like it had hardly any worms in it. It seemed like the worms had come in, taken advantage of the stuff that was there, but then even might have made their way back out into the finished castings. And that might have been because the finished castings might have been a little bit more damp than ideal for this sort of a process. So I think that setting the stage for a migration not only consists of creating a really yummy spread for them over in the collection area and the feeding area, but it's also first kind of getting them poised for wanting to go after that, which means maybe letting the material that they're inhabiting dry a bit, perhaps even to the point where they're anxious to get out of it and are looking or actively for something more damp and comfortable. So I see a worm here. I see a couple now. I think the dampness of the material might be one of the reasons I was leaning more towards running this as a little bit of a wedge, probably because it's going to take a little bit longer for this material to dry to the point where all the worms in it are really going to want out of it. Because right away, the first couple handfuls of stuff, showed us that the material is still quite comfortable, enough so that it's keeping worms in it. The worms are not seeking out greener pastures, although you got to admit, a great number of them already have. I don't know, maybe these might just be ones that are more tolerant to the continually drying material. Maybe they're just not as bright as the ones that already made their way over into the nice new feeding zone. So let's not get into the habit here of trying to pick worms out individually. It's the whole idea of migrating the worms, letting them do the work of getting over into the new space. So we'll try to help this process along by giving the system a good aeration, helping some of the more damp stuff that's sitting down low come up higher into the bedding, into the top layers, so that it could possibly release some of its moisture to evaporation. Maybe even some of this more dry stuff that we collected could get mixed in down low to possibly absorb some moisture, but the stuff ain't too bad. It's definitely getting there. It's definitely starting to get a nice moisture level. You know, let's get this thing out of the way here. I feel like I've just been holding it kind of out of my way partially for a few minutes here, but it just seems like, I don't know. Earlier I piled a lot of stuff over and this thing actually saved an overflow, so I think this is good here for the time being. Because okay, so here I could see even more worms, probably a little pocket of more moisture than what we saw on the other side. So this is going to help a lot, I think, just mixing the material around, getting it all loose and airy, and hopefully continuing to lose its moisture to evaporation. Now, I guess I don't want to get myself too caught up in thinking that I know the reason for things, because I feel like a lot of times a person will jump to the explanation for something. It's like, oh, the worms are still here in these castings because X, you know, and then you come up with some sort of a little one-size-fits-all explanation. A lot of times it's completely wrong. So I don't want to get in the habit of doing that, you know, but I do believe that the castings are probably a little bit more damp than would be ideal for a quick migration. I've started migrations with pretty dry material to start with, and it seems like those migrations concluded very, very quickly. And I've also run migrations with material that was just way too damp, and it was quite clear from the get-go that the material was way too damp, but it started anyway, and it took pretty much forever waiting for the material to become dry enough to motivate the worms to want out of it and to move out of it. But yeah, I don't think that this material is going to require a whole lot more, and I think you can even tell just from the number of worms. If you were here with me last time or during some of the previous times, you'll remember that this material had a lot of worms living in it. But even as recently as the most recent check-in 10 days ago, we did see that a lot of worms were collecting over in the feeding area too. And once we get over there, I think you'll see what I mean. I would have to guess that what's over there already has got to be significantly more than what's still lingering behind in the finished compost. So we'll give them the time they need to make their way over to join up with the rest of the crowd. But I'm gonna start blending in some of this drier stuff that we collected off the surface. Here and there I'm coming up with like a little boulder, and they flake apart pretty readily. I can't say that there's anything in here that seems like it's excessively damp. So I've had that too, and that really gets messy. Somehow the material gets into this clumpy, I don't know, it just makes little particles like this little piece of paper here would suddenly start getting all kinds of material sticking to it because of the excess moisture. You end up with these nasty boulders with all kinds of stuff stuck inside of them. Luckily this stuff here is just right. It's all flaking apart into a nice loose granular material, still pretty moist, still pretty comfortable for worm action, still probably damp enough also for cocoon action. And I think it's probably because of my desire to see cocoons in here also hatch and babies migrate out along with the rest of them that letting it get too dry is maybe not the best idea. If I was going to run this separately as a cocoon nursery, just do the worm haul out and then, you know, do everything I can to make this optimal for cocoon hatching, then that would include making sure the moisture levels are pretty generous and comfortable so the cocoons and the babies do well. But here we're kind of doing the opposite, letting stuff dry. So that's the only conflict that I see, you know, in terms of trying to have something that's perhaps not so much a migration, something that's maybe more of a wedge. But if it's more of a wedge, you do need to continue managing the pretty much depleted, not depleted, I guess, yeah, I guess this is depleted material. There's no bedding, there's no food. The only thing left, I think, is moisture and just little scraps, but it's enough to keep the worms behind. But yeah, I mean, you've got to keep this stuff from getting too dry, otherwise the cocoon action ain't going to happen the way you're hoping. So, alright, I've stacked up this stuff over here pretty high, and I think we can maybe even move stuff over just a little tiny bit more. I guess I was sort of interested in possibly increasing the size of the collection area a bit if possible, but I also don't want to make this stuff too thick, so I want it to be spread out over a pretty good space so that it can dry. If it gets too thick depth wise, I wonder if we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot and it's not going to continue to dry and it's just never going to depopulate. So let's see what's going on over here. I know a lot of people are going to continue to urge me to do the haul out, get the worms out of here. Why don't I do it? I don't know why. I guess I am intrigued by the whole wedge approach. And it does seem to me like we managed to create an environment on this side of the bin that's really, I don't know, working well, if you ask me. I mean, I do see leftover chunks of food after 10 days. Depending on the food, I guess it's not unusual. And I think I smell citrus. Maybe that's orange? I don't know. That would kind of make sense that that's taking a little bit longer. This looks like a piece of napkin. And I remember I must have used about 7 or 8 napkins setting up the feeding zone here last time. Because knowing that these are African night crawlers, I know they like their carbon-based foods and their bedding. So I wanted to make sure that I gave them a whole lot of that stuff last time. But it does seem to me like, even though there's leftover food items like kitchen scraps, like orange and whatever, it does seem to me like there's virtually no leftover bedding. None of the napkins. None of those 8 or 9 or 7 or 8 napkins I threw in here. Well, no, that's not true. I think I did actually see part of one, but it might have been because it was kind of jumbled together or crumpled up. Maybe that's why it didn't break down. Is this it? Yeah. So it does seem like one of our napkins didn't get completely gobbled up, but if you were to look at the video from last time, you would see I used a huge number of napkins in here to build this as the bedding, and they've done away with pretty much all of it. Kind of expected, pretty characteristic of this type of worm to really enjoy plowing through that type of food. And you can see there's lots and lots of worms in here. So maybe, maybe those leftover bits of citrus aren't really satisfying their needs anymore. Perhaps it's just not even broken down to the point where these wormies can take much advantage of it. So I'm just going to shove them aside once again a little bit and try to build up a nice new paper-rich, again, feeding area. And we're going to let this wedge continue a little bit longer. After 40 days, though, I would like to think that most of the cocoons left behind in this material over here are pretty close to, if not hatched. Anything that was deposited over the last, few weeks, perhaps if a couple wormies in here right now are depositing cocoons, maybe those are kind of out of scope at this point. I do want to kind of have a finite period of time for this activity, and that means at some point transitioning away from just treating this as an ongoing perpetual wedge style setup to actually doing a worm haul out and harvesting the castings. So the wedge will continue, but it is kind of just a fun experiment thing, for observation purposes. There's really no reason we wouldn't be able to haul all these worms out, and I would say that there's probably enough worms here to easily launch 2 systems. But for fun, I think we're just going to continue on, and we're going to see what we could do about really depopulating this thing, maybe give it another certain amount of time. And to get this going, I've already got some of the food I had intended to feed them with to reset this feeding zone, but I've got to collect some paper and bedding items. Like before, I'm going to use large chunks just because it makes it easier to see later what happened to it. But I got a feeling they're going to do the same. They're going to gobble it all up. Let me take a short break here. Maybe I'll let these little guys here keep you company for a minute or two while I'm away. I'm just going to grab some bedding that we could set their feeding area back up with, and then we'll be done. And I'm back, and I see a little guy came for a ride along with me. So luckily it didn't drop off and land on the ground somewhere and get stepped on. But that does seem like the only hitchhiker that tagged along. But yeah, I was thinking, let's see, we're going to do kind of what we did last time. We're just going to lay in all the way opposite of the finished compost, all the way out on this edge, kind of perpetuating the wedge idea, is that the newest stuff goes all the way out on one end and the oldest stuff is left on the other end. And in time, the worms will kind of continually keep tracking towards the newly added material. So let's see what we came up with here. I grabbed a few pieces of newspaper. So I think we'll sort of line the feeding area with some of this. And I also brought over a pretty good sized collection of napkins and paper towels, a variety of different paper items. So we'll drop in a little bit of this on top of the newspaper. But I think it's time to start dropping in some of the food we bought for them as well. So let's see. This is a collection of mainly cucumber, but I think there's some pepper in here. You can see the seeds of the pepper here, jalapeno. So let's see what we could do about maybe stacking in this food in little layers so we can mix it in with, oops, making a mess. Mix it in with some other things, more paper is what I was thinking, since they seem to like it so much. Let's not deny them access to more. We'll sprinkle a little bit of this food, maybe even combine some of this worm chow with it. Looking good. And what else can we do to dress up this feeding area? A little bit of coffee. Throw in about half of what I bought down here. And then here's some watermelon. So now, I guess I didn't really intend to increase the size of this whole thing quite so much. So I'm thinking maybe we could start bringing this material back a little bit, just so I can restore the trench that I had to build into. So let's reinforce this wall with some of this material that we can return down here to hold it up for us. I guess this slope doesn't hurt either. Here and there I find a chunk of old stuff. I want to pull it out and throw it over. But yeah, these castings really look nice. Definitely coming along nice. But yeah, every now and then I bump into a little something that looks like if it was just a little bit more damp, it could become the basis of a little boulder, a little pile of junk. So I'm always glad to see loose pieces of leftover bedding that are not causing material to stick to them and clump up. Alright, so I'm not keeping track, but we already gave them, I don't know, 4 or 5 napkins and paper towels. I think they're gonna like this. But I don't know, it feels almost like I'm running out of room to put the rest of the food in, so let's see what we could do about making sure it all fits before we run out of space down here for them. I got a feeling they're gonna really enjoy this. Look at all this stuff. Cucumber peels, melon bits, even a little chunk of pepper in there, worm chow, and perhaps the best of all is all this paper. Because you could see what they have done to what they got last time. They pretty much wiped it all out. And I'm not even sure if I've got much room for more here. I'm reluctant to leave a lot of food items exposed to the air. I don't want to have insects or whatever coming over for it. So I guess maybe the coffee is a pretty good almost like an odorless, sort of not a juicy, savory food item. Something good to cover up with at the end, I believe. Try to keep any sort of curious insects from sensing what might be really delicious stuff right below the surface. I guess what I'd really like to do is somehow cover up the feeding area with some existing material. The only problem is the majority of the existing material is just all worms. a little bit of leftover bedding and food bits, but mainly just worms and castings. Very nice, very nice. I guess this would even just let us come in a little bit further, just so we can try to level things off here a bit more. You know, this is probably a check-in that could have gotten done in about 5 minutes, but this is definitely an interesting bin, fun to check in on. And, you know, I can't blame myself for dawdling, because it is just fun to be scoping out what's going on in here. And oh boy, what about this guy? I'm usually pretty careful not to let worms get stranded out on the plastic covering, but I was, I guess, not paying close enough attention. But luckily we got him back into the mix and he didn't end up on the tablecloth dried up. But I think we're done here. I've still got a few things I'm going to have to clean up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go, let me really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.